Greetings, I'm Rose. Welcome to my sewing cave, and welcome back to any returning visitors. In this video, I will walk you through the steps I took to create this Edwardian lace blouse. I am wearing ready to wear, and creators, it is okay. You do not have to make every single thing you wear. I love this dress and I love the lace, and I thought it was fitting given all the lace used to create this blouse. So the pattern I used to create this blouse was the New Vintage Lady, the Gibson. It is a 1910s walking ensemble. So it includes the pattern for the blouse and also includes the pattern for a walking skirt. I just made the blouse. Now, if you follow my channel at all, you know that I make tons of pattern alterations and I love any excuse to add lace to a garment. February is Black History Month. Sew Natural Dane and Island Socialist, I will put their information in the description box, are hosting a sewing challenge called Black History Month Pattern Designers. And the goal is to support small Black-owned businesses and also use a sewing pattern designed by those businesses. So this can be to create a garment or a craft or a purse. And I've decided to make this blouse. This blouse was designed by New Vintage Lady, Shelly, and I have been following and reading her blog since at least 2014. And I've purchased patterns from her in the past, but I've never used them. And I thought, what better way to support her than to purchase another pattern and make this Sewalong. So I hadn't made this pattern before, so I took some pictures as I went along, but what I'll be doing is I'll be talking you through some of the steps I took to create the finished garment. The fabric I used for this garment is cotton voile. Cotton voile? I believe it's cotton voile. Feel free to correct me in the comments. And this is off-white cotton voile that I bought from Metro Textiles. And this insert right here, most of it came from my grandmother's stash. And the off-white was really actually a stark white compared to the insert. And so I ended up tea dyeing my cotton. And what I did is I took the full 3 yards of cotton and I soaked it. I just got it wet and kept it wet. And then in a big like stock pot, I put 4 quarts of water, a 1/4 cup of salt, and 6 tea bags of Earl Grey tea. And I put that all together and I boiled it up. So it was roiling boil. And then what I did is I took it off heat, took out the tea bags, and just put in the wet fabric and stirred it for a good 5-10 minutes. I didn't do an exact timing. I was just stirring it until I thought I had at least a subtle color change. Obviously I didn't want it to go brown, but I just wanted enough of a kind of aged look so it would match the insert I got from my grandmother. So after that, I rinsed it under cold water until it ran clear, and then I just threw it in the washer and dryer. And so I got all of the shrinking out, and I got this subtle color. So it is a little bit darker than I wanted, but I think overall it created kind of that antique garment look that I was looking for. So I used 3 yards. That was more than enough. You probably only need 2.5. I always buy extra cotton voile just because I know I'm going to use it for underlining or interfacing. So after I tea dyed the fabric, I did some basic alterations to the pattern. My measurements are 44-45 inch bust. I cut the 46, and I usually have to do a full bust adjustment, so I thought just sizing it up would give me that extra bit of ease that I need for my full bust. So here's all the pieces I cut out. The vintage insert from my grandmother, the vest middle piece cut on fold, extended by 2 inches, the cuff, which I have now cut 4, the pattern only says 2, the collar, I've cut 4, pattern only calls for 2. The sleeve, I cut 2 per the pattern. Then this is the back that I've clearly marked cut on fold, extended by 2 inches. And the front, it is not cut on fold, and I have extended it by 2 inches. After all of my pieces were cut out, I decided to just disregard the instructions for the patterns and do all the fiddly pieces first. So the collar, I cut out 4 pieces. The pattern says to cut out 2, but I knew I would be doing lace insert, so I wanted to have that second layer to enclose the seams. Right here where you can see the lace insert, I marked just a line on the grain line, and that was kind of the foundation point for putting the lace in the collar. I wanted to make sure that whatever I did to the collar, I didn't weaken or go against the grain of the collar. So I just marked along the grain line with a straight line on 2 of the 4 pieces that I cut out, and then I laid this lace there is a center detail of the floral, and I laid that directly over that grain line that I marked on the collar. And then I did a straight stitch on the middle of the decorative scalloped edge, and I did that on both sides. After I did the straight stitch on both sides of the mesh opening, I cut that grain line that I had marked previously and pressed that seam open. And after pressing it open, I zigzagged on the top on both sides of the collar. And I decided only on one piece of lace insertion because I knew my insert was going to be fairly complex. So once the lace was inserted, I attached the two lace fronts in the middle using a French seam. I added this lace, and so I marked the 1/2 seam allowance. All seam allowances on this pattern are 1/2 along the edge of the collar, and then I pinned this lace in place along that line, and then I top stitched about 3/8 just so I could make sure when I stitched at the 1/2 inch mark the lace would be fully captured. Once I had stitched this lace along the inside of the entire collar, I attached the other two pieces. So I stitched that together just like I did on the top with a French seam. And I put wrong sides together with the lace still facing the middle and stitched along that edge a 1/2 inch. After that, I turned it all out, pressed nicely, used my purple thing, and made sure to get a decent point on both ends of the collar. Pressed everything nicely, and then I basted at 3/8 both of these edges together so that I would just have one loose collar piece. After the collar was done, I set that aside. And you'll need to edge finish the front sections on the center front that are going to get folded back, because once you attach it to the back, which is the first step shown in the instructions, you will not be able to go back and fully finish that seam. So I have just edge finished both sides of the center front, and then there is a dotted line So after edge finishing this front edge, you'll fold back the fabric along that dotted edge and lightly press. And that edge is where the insert is going to be. But once you have that front edge folded back, you will connect the front to the back at the shoulder seam. The front gets gathered into the back shoulder seam. It's a very small gather. So I just did it freehand. That's why it looks a little bit uneven, but you can use a needle and thread, or you can do, the 2-thread long stitch and gather that way. I have French seamed these edges. This fabric is pretty sheer, so I wanted to make the inside seams as clean as possible because they might show through because the cotton voile is so sheer. So once I connected the front to the back, I then moved on to connecting the collar. So I just marked the center back section and I aligned that with the seam that I had for the collar and stitched it to the, the top that we've connected at the shoulders all the way down at the 1/2 inch mark. Now there isn't a facing in this pattern. I have used a satin bias binding from the stash I inherited from my grandmother, and so all I did was at the 3/8 mark I had stitched the satin binding on top of that seam that I just connected the collar, and then I understitched it and then folded it under to fully encapsulate that seam, and I hand stitched it down all the way around. So it's this nice little pop of satin here. It's not really noticeable. So once I had the collar installed, I had then closed my side seams. Now I'm going out of order. I think the first or second or third step in the directions call you to put the insert in, but I wanted to make sure that I had the rest of the shirt complete before I put the insert in, because I wanted to make sure the insert hit at exactly where I wanted, because I tend to like things a little bit low cut, and I wanted to make sure that it kind of aligned with the collar and gave the look I wanted. So again, I didn't follow the instructions. I just kind of did my own thing like I usually do. After stitching up the side seams at 1/2 inch using a French seam, I sewed up the underarm seam on the sleeve. I did that French seam as well, 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then the cuff. The pattern only calls for you to cut out 2, but I cut out 4 because I wanted it to be lined, not have exposed seams on the inside. So I cut out 4 pieces of the cuff. There's no placket or anything for the cuff. It's just a tube. I stitched the 2 pieces of the cuff together, top stitched at the bottom, and then the sleeve does need to be gathered into the cuff. I always get kind of wonky top stitching when I top stitch on top of where a gathering occurred. So after I attached the cuff to the sleeve, I ended up hand sewing the cuff on the underside, just so it could stay nice and neat and I wouldn't have the little bumps that I get sometimes from stitching over a gathered seam. So once the sleeve was instructed, I inserted it into the arms. It has a little bit of easing. You do need to gather it just a tiny bit, but not a lot. It went in really, really well. I did not use a French seam on my sleeve insertion. I have never figured out how to do a French seam on an eased sleeve. So if you have any pointers, let me know, put them in the comments. So after inserting the sleeves, I moved on to the insert. Now this insert it's actually 3 pieces of fabric. One is just following that vest insert pattern piece cut on the fold. 2 is the insert that I inherited from my grandmother that goes from here to here. And I did not have enough fabric length to make this full insert. So I pieced a piece of the cotton voile on top. And in order for it to flow, I added this piece of lace. And then I had this wider piece of lace I inherited from my grandmother that overlaps on the seam. It does a really good job of hiding where I had to piece it together. And then I've used the same lace that I used here up to the top. And then the lace around the collar has been attached at the top. And what I did is I kind of made I sandwiched the 2 rectangles together and then stitched them all the way around and then turned them inside out. And then top stitched at the top to close it up. So this is 2 pieces of fabric. The pattern is designed for 1, but again, I have all these insertions and the holes. I wanted to make sure I had a little bit of a lining. Now, since I had already constructed everything else, and I had used some hand sewing techniques when stitching up the binding and stitching up the cuff, I decided to hand stitch this on. So I put on the blouse and then I put the insert and I pinned it where I wanted it to fall. And for me, that is right where the collar connects with the blouse. I pinned it in place. So I have some whip stitches on the back and then I use some whip stitches on the front and side here. Now for the tie belt, this is 2 inches wide, which is the same width as the pattern is drafted for a tie belt, and I just cut the width of my fabric twice. So it's a little bit longer than it needs to be, but I didn't want to be all particular about measuring. You know how I am. If I can get away with just going along one edge, I do. So this is 2 inches with the 1/2 inch seam allowance, folded in half and pressed, so it makes a tie that is 3/4 of an inch wide. Now, this isn't called for in the pattern, but I decided to add thread loops on the side seams just so I would have something to guide the cinching of the tie belt. And my tie belt is 6.5 inches from the hem. So depending on the size of your hem, you may need to make it 7, but mine's 6.5, and I did a very small baby hem. And once I had the waist tie complete, I hemmed the bottom of my blouse, and if you saw, I did all the fiddly bits first. I don't know why, but towards the end of a project, I always kind of like just want to hurry up and get it done. So instead of doing some nice, delicate, like baby hem, all I did was serge the bottom of the blouse, fold it up, and top stitch. But it still gives it a delicate edge. So overall, I love the way this turned out. I love that I was able to use this lace insert that I inherited from my grandmother, along with this, like this lace piece was just a tiny bit bigger. It had a little bit of staining that came out mostly when I soaked it, so I was able to use that. And I was able to do lace insertion. I had never done lace insertion, and I had never done tea dyeing before. So I think I would make this again. I think I'm going to give this one to my mom. She really, really likes it. It might be a little bit too big for her, so I may need to make her one a little bit smaller, but it is true to size. It came together really well, very intuitive. I didn't really have to follow the directions, but Shelly does put some really cute jokes and motivation in the directions if you do follow them. And I think based on what I saw, I would definitely need to start making up some of the other patterns I purchased from her in the past. I love this, and it looks so beautiful. I have some, like a longer skirt that I wear at the Renaissance Fair. So what I did is I kind of mirrored Shelly's pattern art, and I've worn it with the green skirt. I think it looks really well. It works really well, but I like it better actually with just jeans. And it gives that kind of delicate, romantic, kind of cottagecore vibe that is really popular right now. I did, when I was making it, I actually did like prick my finger and get some blood on here, but it soaked and came right out, so I was really afraid that I was going to ruin it, but no, and even though it's delicate, it's still cotton, so it's going to last a while. I think it'll really stand the test of time, especially with the French seaming, and you know, the reinforcement stitchings that I've done throughout, but it's beautiful, and it's just enough whimsy. I think I could wear this day to day. If you have any questions about the alterations, the trims, or any of the details I changed to make this version, let me know in the comments. And please check out So Natural Dane, Island Socialist, and New Vintage Ladies Etsy store, which I will put in the description box. Thanks for watching. See you soon.